the first and almost certainly only video that I'll ever make. I'm making this because a few days ago I posted some pictures of a pen blank cutting jig that I had made, and a few of you commented and asked for more information about it. That was a prototype. That's what's sitting in front of me here, and I'm going to tell you what I did and what ended up being wrong about it and how I fixed it. So this is the jig that I posted pictures of a couple of days ago. Very simple, just some scrap plywood that I had lying around. Cost me absolutely nothing. It's just nothing but scrap wood and spare parts. The bottom of it, I've got a groove with a recessed slot for the bolt to ride in, and then another hole with just that I just countersunk with a Forstner bit to make room for the bolt head there, and then of course just a miter bar to ride in the slot on my bandsaw. And then so what you have is this platform with the one stationary bolt, and then one that slides in the slot and allows this arm to move to set different angles for cutting your pen blank. And the idea is that you put the pen blank in there, you would clamp it down with this hold down, and then be able to slide it through and cut at an angle to do things like Celtic knots or any other kind of inlay that you might want to do in your pen blank. Well, there were some problems with the way I made this one. The first thing is this hold down is more in the way than anything else, and it doesn't really seem to do much good. And it kind of might do some harm because when you clamp it down hard, it pulls up against the movable arm, and that can tend to skew the way you cut. So get rid of the hold down. That was a bad idea. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can safely hold the blank in against the movable arm without any problem. But if you wanted to, you could just put a regular F clamp or something like that to hold the blank against the movable arm, and that would give you more flexibility anyway. The other thing that was wrong, and this was the big thing, was that I made the arm and the slot too short. And what happened was, for example, in this pen blank, I wanted to do a Celtic knot, which means that I have to do cuts at these angles all the way around the blank, and I'll do one a little bit later. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I'll show you how that works. But you want to do that roughly centered in the portion of the blank where the Celtic knot is going to reside. So I've drawn a line here. This is for a trim line pen. I've drawn a line where the tube would sit in this portion of the pen, leaving about 1/16 of an inch on each end. I'll go grab a tube so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is the tube from the trim line kit, and it'll fit inside the blank just like that. And so you want the Celtic knot to be right in the middle of that portion. So the idea is that you could put this on the jig, slide the jig to the position that you want, and then make the cut at 45 or 30 or whatever angle you want your knot to be. The problem is that I didn't make this long enough so that I can't actually slide it down far enough to have that knot be in the top end. So an easy fix would be to put it in the bottom end. Well, it's not long enough that way either. So the arm was just too short. I made this arm, I think this was 11 inches and the slot was 9 inches, and that's just inadequate. So between getting rid of the hold down clamp and getting a longer arm, I can just keep, there's nothing wrong with this this platform that I did. Again, there's not much to it, it's just a piece of plywood. But so that'll stay. I'm going to get rid of this, and instead I have an arm that's longer and has about an 11.5 inch slot rather than the 9 inch slot that I had before. So with this, everything else works exactly the same, and I can slide this now much further. So I can either do my cuts down at this end and they work out fine, or I can flip the blank around. I think this is the way that I would prefer to do it, and slide it down here, put that line right on my kerf line, and set it at a 45-degree angle, and then you know, I'm ready to cut, tighten it down and ready to go. So what I have now is a 13-inch arm and 11.5 inches. And the distance between the two hold down bolts here is 4 inches, 2 inches on either side of the kerf line. All right, so, and that seems to be a good distance. Now, as long as you make the hole for the stationary bolt and the end of the slot for the moving bolt parallel to each other, all you have to do to get it back to 90 degrees is just pull it down until it stops. You're at 90 degrees, and then you know you could use it there to cut your blanks to width or to length, and then do the slide it up to do the angled cuts. Now, to set your angled cuts, easiest thing, you just take a speed square and put up against there, and you can do this with or without the blank in position, but slide it into where you think it's going to go, lock it up against your speed square, and you're set. And that's exactly 45 degrees. If you wanted to do 90 degree or a 30-degree cut or something like that, you know, you could either do that by using the speed square at different angles, or you could just get a another angle jig to do that. You know, that's easy enough. For me, you don't need that much precision when you're doing things like Celtic knots. You can just eyeball it. You can just say, okay, well, I don't want 45, that's going to be too big of a knot. I want it to be kind of a smaller one, so you can just adjust it to the whatever angle you think is going to look good, and go ahead and make your cut. So somebody suggested, there were a couple of suggestions in the Facebook group about ways to improve this. Somebody suggested an arc for the slot that the movable arm rides in, like a J or an arc across. I honestly don't see how that would help, because as long as you can slide both directions, I don't think there's any angle that I could get by having an arc in that second slot that I can't get just by sliding in both directions with the jig like this. The other suggestion was to put a sacrificial board against the arm, which I've done here. I made that sacrificial board just from the notch that I had cut initially to make room for the blank. And you'll note that I don't put it all the way against the back here, and that's because I think it's helpful to have a little bit of space there to catch the sawdust and things. All right, so that's the jig. Now, what I haven't done yet is mark the 45 so that I can find it every time, and I think that would be kind of helpful. So I'm going to once again just go ahead and set this up at a 45-degree angle, just like that. I'll lock it in. And all I'm going to do for now is just use a pencil and mark that line so that I can find it next time. There's one next to a blank, so if every time I use a 3/4 inch blank like this, I can line it up against that line. And then I've also got it against the base of the arm, so I can always line that up, and that way I'll know where it is for 45. That's a good reference point. Somebody suggested I should do a knife edge there or something like that. Yeah, I might do that just to make it a little bit more permanent, but at this point I think that's sufficient. All right, so I've got that set. Now I'm going to go ahead and adjust this up so that I'm still on that 45, and I've got my kerf line where I want it against the line that I had already drawn on the blank. Lock that in. Like I said, I think you can just hold this in place. You know, keep your finger away from the blade, of course. If you're not comfortable doing that, I would suggest something like this would probably work just fine. You know, you can clamp it in like that if that makes you feel better about it. Again, I don't know that that's really doing anything beneficial, but it's certainly not hurting, so no reason not to leave it there. All right, so I'm gonna grab my safety gear. So the way you do these, if you're not familiar with the Celtic knot technique, the way you do it is you cut a kerf like this, and then you'll put a contrasting color thin piece of either wood. Sometimes I've heard of people using like credit cards or gift cards, a little piece of plastic in their woodwork. I don't, if I'm using a light wood, I'll make a shop-made veneer like a walnut or something. That looks really nice. I don't actually have any of that around, but what I do have hanging around today is a whole bunch of these little craft sticks. So I think that it'll work to just use the craft stick in there as the contrasting wood. Now the only problem is that you can see the craft stick is just a little too thick to go in there easily, and I don't want to split the wood, so I need to make that kerf just a little bit bigger. So I got an idea for how I can do that. Alright, so here's the idea. Blue tape to the rescue. All I've done is I've taken some blue tape and I just made kind of a little flap right here at the point in the jig where the wood rests, and I'm hoping that just that few thousandths there will be enough to widen the kerf so that that little craft stick that I have will fit in there without making it loose. The wood has to be tight in that kerf, or you're going to end up with gaps when you go to turn it. But hopefully that will be enough. So I'm going to give that a shot and see how that works out. I've got my craft stick, which obviously I cut the rounded end off of because you wouldn't want that. Alright, and that'll slide in there pretty nicely now. So what I'm going to do is glue that in, and then I'll cut off the excess, rotate the blank, and do 4 more of the same thing. Alright, so I'm not going to waste your time showing you how to do a glue up, but basically this is what you should end up with after the first kerf. You put whatever material you're going to use for your contrasting color into that kerf. Again, note that I didn't cut all the way through the blank. I left about a 1/16 of an inch at the end here. That's what kind of keeps everything aligned as I go through and do all these cuts. So I'm going to let this dry for a couple of hours, then I've got to come back and do the same thing 4 more times. What you'll end up with is 4 crisscrossed pieces of wood going through your pen blank, all glued into place. And as long as you let the glue dry sufficiently between cuts, everything should stay nice and straight and smooth as you do that. So I'll come back and make the next cut in a couple of hours. Alright, the next step then is to cut off the excess here and then make the second cut. Get rid of the jig while I do this part. Alright, now being careful to keep the jig in exactly the same position so that I'm making the same cut every time. You can just put this back on, rotate my little flap out of the way there. Then I'll make the second cut and do the same thing, leave it about 1/16 of an inch short at the end. So I've got the second kerf line made there, and I'll just glue the contrasting wood into that kerf line. We'll have a cross, and then I'll do the same thing again on each of the other remaining sides. One thing I didn't mention before that can be pretty helpful when you're gluing up is these little glue syringes. They're super cheap. You can get them online. I think I bought these at the woodworking show a couple of years ago. But when you're trying to get glue into a tight little spot like this, it can be helpful to put a little bit of pressure behind it with the syringe and squirt it in there. And I actually like to go along the sides as well. And then once you've done that, you can take just a 3x5 card or any kind of thick paper that's not just going to fold up on you, and use that to kind of spread the glue into that saw kerf. Once you've got the glue in there, you take your contrasting wood and make sure that it's glued up on both sides. And then just slide it into that kerf. It can be helpful to try to make sure that one edge is nice and flat against the board so that you don't have to cut excess off of both edges. Once you've got that slid in there, good and tight, put away your glue syringe, and the glue will keep in this for a long time with that lid on there too, by the way. And grab your clamp and just put a little bit of pressure on there just to make sure that joint closes tightly. And then once again, we'll leave this to dry before I come back and make the third and fourth cut.
I'll be downstairs with the shop vac. You can call, but I probably won't hear you because it's loud with the shop vac on. You'll be okay, 'cause you'll be upstairs with the TV. You can cry, and I probably won't hear you.
Leaving that 1/16 of an inch or so at the end of each cut kind of keeps it from coming apart and makes it a whole lot easier to glue up and clamp and everything. So I could be done with the blank at this point, and I could just cut it here and move on to drill the tube holes and everything and move on to turning the pen. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the Celtic knot in the tip half of the pen, and this is just going to be a trim line pen. Celtic knot up in the tip half, and then I'm going to do just 2 crossed rings at different angles in the cap end of the pen, really just to kind of show how the jig can be used for that. If you don't want to do Celtic knots, you can do just about anything else, any other angled cuts as well. So what I'm going to do is just a quick two rings. I'm going to do one of them at a little bit steeper than 45-degree angle, and one of them at a shallower angle. And again, this is all just going to be eyeball. I'm not going to bother measuring any angles. This is the pen blank ready to cut into the segments to be drilled out, have the tubes put in, and then turn them on the lathe. So we've got the top part here. This is going to be the tip end of the pen, and that's all set up to turn into a Celtic knot. And then at the bottom part, I just did two crossed contrasting woods, and that's just going to be two crossed rings that'll be in the cap end of the pen. So pretty simple stuff, especially with this jig. Next step will be to cut it into the segments, which will also be done on the jig. Somebody suggested in the Facebook group that I ought to use a sacrificial board, which I'm going to do. I had it on there before with just two-sided tape, but it really didn't hold very well, so I'm going to do a trick that I like to use when I want something to be not quite permanent, but to hold a little bit better. I just put blue tape, good old trusty blue tape, on both surfaces to be stuck, and then I put that together, put a quick little clamp on there, and that will hold nice and secure. That'll hold a whole lot better than the two-sided tape, and then but it's still not permanent. I'll still be able to pop it off when I want to. All right, so ready to get everything set up for the segment cutting now. Again, it's a trim line pen. This is the tube for the trim line. Easiest way to set this up, generally I want about a 1/16 of an inch at each end of the tube once it's inserted into the blank for squaring. So what I want is about an 1/8 of an inch at the end of the pen, between the end of the tube and the bandsaw blade. So I take the pen blank, set up my movable arm where I want it. So there's about an 1/8 of an inch here. That'll translate to a 1/16 on each side. Tighten it down. And what I'm going to do, because this is the first time I'm using this particular jig, I'm going to go ahead and, with the assumption that I'm going to make more trim line pens, I'm going to make a mark right there and just put a little TL next to it, so I know in the future when I want to set up for a trim line, that's the approximate place that I'll put it. Now, just like the rulers that go on the edge of your table saw and everything, I'm not going to trust that every time. I know that that's approximately where it'll be, but it's easy enough to just throw a tube down and make sure that I'm in the right spot. So I've got the tube there. I can push this up against there, and that's going to cut it and leave just enough to have that 1/16 of an inch at each end for squaring. And as I was saying before, if you don't want to just hold it in a position, you can put a clamp on there. And I think for this time, I'll go ahead and do that, just because I want to make sure that it doesn't move while I'm cutting. But again, I don't know how necessary that is, but it's so that's it for the jig. That's all.
You can cry and I probably won't hear you, because it's loud with the shop vac on. We hung a flag above the door, checked out the gourmet grocery store. I bought a mower I can
do a Celtic knot pen, but if you haven't seen it before, I'll show you how I do it. There are probably a million different ways. First thing that I didn't mention at the beginning, and I probably should have, if you're doing the Celtic knot, you've got to make sure that your blank is perfectly square at the beginning, because if one side is slightly longer than the adjoining side, you're going to end up with an off-center cross of the contrasting woods, and that's going to put your whole Celtic knot off-center. And then when you go to turn it, one side of the pen is going to have a broader spread between the the bands than the other side, and it's going to look funny. So first thing is, before you get started with any of this, make sure that your blank is squared up. I have done that already. The next thing, once you've got it cut down into the two halves, again, assuming that you're doing a pen with two halves, like a trim line, then you go and just put your cross to find your center point. And I always kind of double check this because, again, for the same reason with a Celtic knot pen, it's more critical than with other pens to make sure that your tube is drilled exactly in the center of the wood. The other thing that I'll do with the Celtic knot half is I'll mark the center on both sides, so that if I drill through and I find that somehow my blank was not perfectly straight, or my drill bit straight or something, and I came out crooked, I'll know that and not waste my time gluing a blank into or gluing a tube into a blank that's not going to work when I try to turn it. So I just put the X on each end there. I'll double check it, make sure that it's really in the center. And it appears to be good. And then I'll take, just as a final precaution, I'll just take an awl and really make sure that that center point is clear, so that when I go to drill it, I'll be in the right spot. So I'll do the same thing with the other half, and then I'll set it up to drill. Alright, so this is another jig that I made. This one is for drilling the blanks on the horizontal boring configuration of the Shopsmith. I'm a Shopsmith guy. I know a lot of you right now are turning off and deleting this video because you hate Shopsmith, but it's actually a good machine. I enjoy using it, and it works really well for my tiny shop. So, so this is another jig that I made. This one holds the blank secure while I do the horizontal boring. Again, a very simple jig to make. I'm not going to bother walking through it all. You can kind of look at it here and see it's just a couple pieces of MDF put up against the fence. Personally, I like the micro jig dovetail clamps, so that's what I use to hold it in place. Once I've got it positioned, and I can just look at the drill bit and make sure that it's going into exactly the right spot there. Got everything positioned, I'll lock it in with these dovetail clamps, and then it's good to go for as many blanks as I need to drill generally. So I'll do a quick touch with it and make sure that I'm in the center and I'm hitting exactly where I wanted to hit. And then go ahead and slowly drill through. Alright. So then I take that one off. Looks generally centered. It might have shifted just a little bit on the back side, so I don't know. This one might come out a little bit skewed, we'll see. Alright, then I clean off the sawdust, so the next one will lay flat. Clamp it into position. Again, make sure that my bit is hitting where I want it to hit. That's it for drilling the blanks. Then I put in the tubes and I'll get ready to start turning. All right, another Shopsmith configuration here, the disc sander. This is how I square up the ends of my blanks when I'm using them. Of course, anytime you're sanding, you should always protect your lungs, especially when you're using something gross like Purple Heart that makes a lot of really fine dust. tip here specifically for the shopsmith guys. I guess this is applicable to everybody because they have these for every kind of lathe, but I really like this. This is the mandrel saver system from Penn State Industries, and it's real easy. You just get your blanks all up on the mandrel there, put it onto your 5/8 spindle, and then slide it over to within about an inch of the tailstock, tighten down the headstock, and then just move your spindle into the tailstock and tighten that down, and it's ready to go for turning. So you can see as this is turning where those where the Celtic knot is going to come in, and then the just the cross strings for the cap end. You can kind of see that starting to come together just with the roughing gouge so far, but got a long ways to go. Of course, fill in the gaps there and everything. As I pare away the Purple Heart, more of the contrasting wood will come through. Alright, so you can see that the Celtic knot is very clearly visible now, and then on the cap end you've got these kind of, I guess you'd call them eccentric rings that just add some character to it. So it's starting to look like a pen now. Going to smooth it out and then get the sanding pads and sand it down, finish it, and I'll show you what we end up with at the end. Alright, so that's it. There's the finished product, Celtic knot pen. Came out pretty nicely. Has the Celtic knot at one end and then just the cross strings up at the other end. The video really wasn't about the pen though. The video was about the jig, and the pen is just to show that the jig actually does what it was built to do. Pretty simple design. You're certainly welcome to go out and build a jig like this, modify it however it works best for you. Use it to crank out Celtic knot pens or other pens with whatever kind of design you want to put in using this jig. But I'll also tell you, if you don't want to build your own jig but you want something like this, there's a gentleman with a manufacturing shop in West Virginia named Tim Geist. He has a website, timstoolcrib.com. Tim makes a really brilliant blank cutting jig that's much nicer than what I built with scrap wood in my shop here. He built it with some really nice materials, and this jig is designed to make it easy to cut blanks to the right length using your miter gauge, and you just put the tube for your pen in, and it sets the distance properly away from your bandsaw blade. So you would put the tube in there, and then your blank is cut to exactly the right length every time. So if you're doing a whole bunch of pens, maybe for a show or something like that, or holiday season, you're building pens for gifts, this makes it easy to crank them out by the dozen if you want to. And Tim has been talking with me. He's thinking about building basically a better, more professional version of my jig, and I welcome him doing that. So I'll put a link, if I can, to a video that shows how this jig works. And I don't think Tim has decided yet if he's going to make this the sliding arm jig. But if he does, if you want to get in touch with him at timstoolcrib.com, he might be selling them. I have no idea how much they'll cost or anything, but Tim does really good work, so if you want to buy a jig instead of making it, that's an option. So there you have it. That's the video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you like it, feel free to click the like button. I guess that'll make me feel warm and squishy inside. You can subscribe, but that would probably be useless because I really don't plan on making any other videos. And hey, if you want to sponsor me for nothing, sure. You know, click like and subscribe and sponsor and whatever. Anyway, hope the video was helpful. And since I don't have any sponsors, I don't know, go out and support the people who sponsor Stumpy Nubs, because I like his videos too. Thanks. Bye.